We have been living under a deception. And a nation that is deceived to that level is a nation that's enslaved. Is a nation that's enslaved.
Organizers of the Left Forum are the Holocaust deniers. They are denying the Holocaust of 30 million Muslims around the world because of this false flag atrocity that they and their people, the people that they are running interference for, actually perpetrated. So I am saying that Marcus and the other people here at the Left Forum who won't allow this message to be spoken in public are Holocaust perpetrators, which is a lot worse than being a mere supposed Holocaust denier simply because you say you support free speech everywhere.
This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue on this? Did senators and congressmen stand up and denounce this plan? Was there a full-fledged American debate on it? Absolutely not. And there still isn't.
We all need a movement of the people, so that we can take our countries back from whatever this is that's got it. Thank you.
The woman that runs this establishment here, her name is Melissa. She lost $5,000 of business because the Zionists called up to the other people who had rented this hall and forced them to pull out of their deal. She has paid a heavy, heavy price for this. This is gangsterism. This is suppression of our right of free speech in a democratic republic. And this is not small change I'm talking about here. We're talking about the crime that changed this country and changed the world. And are you not allowed to talk about it? Are you not allowed to point out the perpetrators? Are you not allowed to pull out the criminal network who did this to us?
Like, I was thinking the other day that you can figure out how bad a person you are by how soon after September 11th you masturbated, like how long you waited.
You know when they changed 9/11? 9/11 people started laughing. I know it sounds terrible. We ended up with 2,400 widows. 2,400 widows, each who finally this year, ended up with a check for $5 million each. And,
Hey, Patrick.
What?
I thought of something funnier than 24.
Let me hear it.
9/11.
I have the notifications made.
Is that done?
Weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here. Oops, this photo wasn't supposed to be in here. This is the Skull and Bone secret signal.
9/11 was clearly designed using the original Pearl Harbor attacks as its template. There needed to be a critical mass of innocent deaths. More people were killed by the alleged suicide hijackers than the number of American soldiers killed in the entire American Revolution, or at Antietam, the bloodiest one-day battle of the Civil War, or at Pearl Harbor, or on D-Day. And locking the roof doors ensured that. So that on 9/11, it happened because of that. The innocent victims above the impact zones were trapped, terrorized, and killed. They had no way to escape except to jump. And even the New York Times published that I believe 105 victims had gotten right up to the door, where in 1993 they were able to go onto the roof, but they were blocked. Also, after the impacts and before the towers fell, dozens of military and civilian helicopters, self-dispatched, wonderful people from the military, started flying towards New York City, intending to rescue survivors from the towers, to risk their lives in their helicopters. They were ordered to go to a nearby military base so that they could not respond. On 9/11, 2 World Trade Center tower attacks, 15 minutes apart, of course, ensured the maximum psyop, ensured this maximum live audience for the second World Trade Center hit and the towers collapse.
And through the war on terrorism, which is the 9/11, which is the first lie, then you create the war on terrorism, which is the next lie, then you create the war in Iraq for weapons of mass destruction, which is the next lie, and it's one lie to the next lie to the next lie. Now it's going to be Iran, the next lie, sending more troops and a surge into Iraq.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
This was an unbelievably powerful building. If you know anything about structure, it was one of the first buildings that was built from the outside. The steel, the reason the World Trade Center had such narrow windows is that in between all the windows you had the steel on the outside. So you had the steel on the outside of the building. That's why when I first looked, and you had big, heavy I-beams, when I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. And this is steel that was, you remember the width of the windows in the World Trade Center, folks. I think you know, if you were ever up there, they were quite narrow. And in between was this heavy steel. I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747 or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. Most buildings are built with the steel is on the inside around the elevator shaft. This one was built from the outside, which is the strongest structure you can have, and it was almost just like a can of soup.
I think that the NIST report is scientifically so flawed that I would call it a fraud. It's a scientific fraud. It's a conscious cover-up.
So
no doubt.
You're accusing the people who worked on it, Dr. Scheim, Sunder, and the other people who worked on it, of deliberately covering up what actually happened.
Yeah. Quite frankly.
It's quite a serious allegation, isn't it?
It is.
And what evidence do you think they deliberately covered up?
Oh, that is a long story.
I'm curious about the pool of molten steel that was found in the bottom of the towers.
I am too.
And
please tell me about it. Have you seen it?
Well, not personally, but eyewitnesses there found huge poles of molten steel beneath the towers.
Now, if we turn to the construction of the Twin Towers, they were magnificent structures. They had 47 massive core columns and 230 external supporting steel columns, which created an enormous amount of open space. It was a novel design called a tube within a tube. Chuck Baldwin, who's a retired high school physics, math, and chemistry professor, has created this characterization so you can appreciate the relative dimensions of the steel in the building as you work from the bottom up. It was at least 5 inches at the base and tapered off to 4, 3, 2 toward the top, where it became at the uppermost portions only about 1/4 inch thick. What this means is in relation to, for example, the North Tower. The top 14 floors of the North Tower above the alleged plane strike represented only 1.4% of the steel. There's no way in which 1.4% of the steel is going to overwhelm the lower 98.6. And by the calculation shown here, he is observing that for one unit of force downward, there were 199 units of force upward. These buildings did not and could not possibly have collapsed.
You know, I think most people know exactly what New York values are.
I am from New York.
Well, you're from New York, so you might not. But I promise you in the state of South Carolina, they do. And listen, there are many, many wonderful, wonderful working men and women in the state of New York. But everyone understands that the values in New York City are socially liberal or pro-abortion or pro-gay marriage, focus around money and the media. And I guess I can frame it another way. Not a lot of conservatives come out of Manhattan. I'm just saying. Everyone understands that the values in New York City are socially liberal or pro-abortion or pro-gay marriage. Not a lot of conservatives come out of Manhattan.
Kakistocracy is government by the worst and most evil people, a highly capable brand of psychopath, if you like. Psychopathy is only mildly hereditary, so an elite psychopath cannot guarantee that sons or daughters will be just as psychopathic. I expect this entails that they need a steady resupply of ruthless and power-hungry individuals who understand the world deeply and pervasively and, as such, are highly capable. Normally deep and pervasive understanding leads to wisdom and a sense of responsibility, humility even. But that is precisely not what the kakistocracy needs. It needs the same depth and pervasiveness of understanding, but in combination with utter ruthlessness and the capacity to appear respectable.
People that when you look at them from the outside and when you listen to when they speak and so on, often they sound very civilized, they sound very pleasant and so on. Then you see the actions and they're monsters almost. I mean, as close as monsters as you can get.
The mythical belief that the American government would never deliberately do anything terribly evil. The type of enormous evil to which Hitler alluded in his discussion of the big lie, in which he said, "Ordinary people more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie, since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. It would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others would have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously."
So if you realize that the people who we have selected, either by election or by fate, our parents, have lied to us to an extent that is so beyond imagination to ordinary people, is very painful, actually. But as a consequence, since now we have something that we're not supposed to talk about, is downright destructive to our Western civilization.
Knowing that your government has been hijacked and that those in charge will lie to you, such knowledge should actually set us free to do what we must to maintain our own dignity.
We're dealing with complete evil. We're dealing with complete evil. And until the American people wake up and say, we don't want this evil in our country anymore, and we want to come back to a country of decency and goodness and integrity and honor, you know, we're going down that road. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to people to stand up and say, we don't want to live in this kind of a world anymore. You know, I believe we should pull all our troops out of Iraq. I believe we should leave other countries alone. Let other countries live their lives the way they choose to. A criminal organization, there's no question about it. But this criminal organization that has prestige, you know, that appears to have class, style, you know, it's like, you know, respected. It's respected. People don't look at it as being a criminal organization.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
There was the question of the 4,000 Israelis who were supposed to be at work that day. And there was a story that came out shortly after 9/11 about this Israeli instant messaging service. If you were an Odigo subscriber,
Jewish employees not to come in. I had a little old
and to Israeli nationals. So
the rabbi had advised the members of the synagogue not to go into Lower Manhattan that morning. She was worried about it. Willie Brown, as mentioned here, actually initially reported he'd been warned. By Condoleezza Rice, he shouldn't fly that day. Goldman Sachs benefited hugely because they got $1 billion in Liberty bonds. Goldman Sachs was very deeply involved and benefited tremendously from 9/11.
the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Christian boys are going to be yanked out of their homes, away from their families, and sent abroad to fight in Palestine against the Christian and Muslim Arabs who merely want to return to their homes. And these Christian boys are going to be asked to shoot to kill these innocent people who only want to follow out 15 resolutions passed by United Nations in the last 12 years, calling upon the Zionists to allow these people to return to their homes.
Hey, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States. And I realized then, it came back to me, a 1991 meeting I had with Paul Wolfowitz. Mr. Secretary, you must be pretty happy with the performance of the troops in Desert Storm. And he said, well, yeah, he said, but not really. He said, because the truth is we should have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, and we didn't. And this was just after the Shia uprising in March of '91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. And he said, but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes, Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. And it was like, you know, I'm coming out of the Mojave Desert. I've been training troops. I haven't been thinking geostrategy for some time. And suddenly a guy just sort of shoves this nugget at you. Well, you remember it. It was a pretty stunning thing. You mean the purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments? It's not to sort of deter conflict? We're going to invade countries? And, you know, my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half-dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. It went back to those comments in 1991. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue on this? Did senators and congressmen stand up and denounce this plan? Was there a full-fledged American debate on it? Absolutely not. And there still isn't. If you're an American, you ought to be concerned about the strategy of the United States in this region. What is our aim? What is our purpose? Why are we there? Why are Americans dying in this region? That is the issue.
When wealthy, racist Jews and white and some white Republican pour in money by the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It is important where his money comes from. So they say, why do I tell where his money comes from? I said it's important. They say that shows that I'm anti-Semitic. I say it's important.
With so many politicians openly calling to expel these so-called infiltrators and whipping up xenophobic hatred against refugees, we went to an anti-refugee rally in Tel Aviv, where demonstrators burned an effigy of the mayor for allowing the children of refugees into local schools.
Go back to the country.
Well, how do you do that, though?
How do you do it? We take them with chains and put them on boats.
According to a 2012 study by the Israeli Democracy Institute for Peace, a stunning 52% of Israelis concur that African migrants are a cancer. Furthermore, the study revealed that a shocking 33% of Israelis condone anti-migrant violence. The racism runs so deep, babies are even attacked. One man tried to murder a 1-year-old baby girl from Eritrea by stabbing her in the head. While once permitted, African refugees are now forbidden to either work or live in Israel's major cities. Today, the Israeli government has an ultimatum to African refugees. Leave now, even offering a one-way plane ticket home or to another undisclosed African country and $3,500 cash, or go to prison. In 2013, the Israeli government admitted it had been administering Depo-Provera birth control injections to Ethiopian women without their consent, in an utter violation of personal sovereignty. The birth rate among Israel's Ethiopian population dropped a stunning 50% from 2002 to 2012 as a result of this eugenics program. The treatment of black people in Israel reveals something very important about the Zionist project, that it's not just about creating a Jewish-only state, but one that is also based on white supremacy, and more recognizing that the struggle for black lives and Palestinian lives are linked together.
When Theodor Herzl, a prominent member of the German Central Bank, made a public statement last week that Jews share a certain gene that differentiate them from others, the Jewish community went ballistic. First of all, the head of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, Stephen Kramer, reacted by saying, whoever identifies Jews by their genetic makeup is consumed by a racial mania. Then when Moshe Kantor, the head of the European Jewish Council, called Herzl's statement anti-Semitic, the Jews lost the battle. You see, if Kantor and other Jewish leaders like Abraham Foxman insist on identifying Jews as Semites, that is a race, and anyone against them as anti-Semites, then they are the ones who are consumed by a racial mania, and any statements on Jewish genes are valid racial observations. But the issue here is much wider than Jewish genes and chromosomes. What everyone seemed to miss was Herzl's statement and how he concluded it. Here's what he said. Jews share a certain gene that differentiate them from others. The peculiarities of the people determines the reality of Europe. What Sarrazin means here is that Jews act as a highly compact racial unit in order to shape the cultural and political realities of Europe. EU Trade Commissioner Karl de Gucht came under fire by world Jewry by saying this very same thing last week in a radio interview as the Washington Middle East peace talks. That is, the Middle East peace talks began in Washington. De Gucht said, "Do not underestimate the grip the Jewish lobby has on American politics, and do not underestimate the opinion of the average Jew either, for most Jews think they are right on the Middle East situation. It's a very emotional issue for them, and to combat it with rational arguments is almost impossible."
Israel clearly had prior knowledge, but prior knowledge in such an attack means complicity. When you have that kind of prior knowledge that something's going to happen, you're involved. You're mixed into it. So I wrote about it very carefully in the beginning, and I continued doing my research, and I found connection after connection after connection. And then within a couple years, I realized that I had pinned the tail on the donkey. That this whole thing had been basically an Israeli project that the Zionist Likud had started back in 1977. And they had wanted to do it earlier. They had wanted to do it back in the 80s. But they had been stymied by a contract. They tried to get the contract for the World Trade Center, but two Mossad agents, Shalom Ben-Dor and Avi Zvi Malkin. These are the guys that kidnapped Eichmann from Argentina. These are old Mossadniks. These are old guys. They're from the beginning. And that's who you find at the architectural level of 9/11. You find guys who are now in their 80s and 90s. These are the guys that dreamed up this whole plan. And the idea of the plan is, as I said, is to bring the United States into what's called the Israeli War on Terror, and that we, the United States, will provide for Israel this security cordon, this security buffer zone.
When the United States troops appear in the Middle East to fight with the Zionists as their allies to prevent the return of these people who were evicted from their homes in the 1948 armed insurrection by the Zionists who were transplanted there from Eastern Europe. I don't care whether you know all this or not. It doesn't make any difference to me whether you know all these facts or not. But it does make a big difference to me. I've got in my family boys that will have to be in the next war. And I don't want them to go and fight and die like they died in Korea, like they died in Japan, like they died all over the world. For what? To help crooks hold on to what they stole from innocent people who had been in peaceful possession of that land, those farms, those homes, for hundreds and maybe thousands of years? Is that why the United States must go to war?
what this really was about was destroying and balkanizing the Middle East so that Israel could continue its genocide and continue to expand while busting up all the countries around it into these smaller, impotent, chaotic units. So this is the reason that more than 30 million Muslims have been murdered around the world since 9/11 for Israeli expansionism. And for, because I am willing to say that, I've got a big scarlet letter on my back. I'm not welcome to speak in a lot of places, including the Left Forum, because the people running the Left Forum are ultimately running interference for the perpetrators of 9/11.
But now, as I said, with this heart attack situation, it's all taken a completely different twist. And here now is Dick Cheney talking about that, I guess. I don't know. Take a look.
Dick Cheney's hunting mishap turned serious yesterday when Harry Whittington suffered a heart attack. Heart attack? Don't steal my act, bitch, or I'll take you out. And I think you know I will. Dick Cheney, locked and loaded.
When the week I come back, the vice president caps a man.
Well, what do you make of Dick Cheney? If this hadn't happened this week, what would you have thought of Dick Cheney?
It's going to be that Dick Cheney blew his head off at the dinner table.
But there was nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government, that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
The next slide after this one is truly chilling. Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor, and Bush both said immediately after the attacks they just couldn't imagine planes having ever been used as weapons in a kamikaze-like attack. Well, she is a historian, and a kamikaze attack triggered U.S. participation in World War II.
I think question number one, where I really want to start, is when your vice president, Dick Cheney, when he shot that guy in the face, did it ever seem funny at all to you?
Well, every time Cheney would come in, a lot of people would yell, duck.
What's that doing?
Holy fuck!
Oh my God! Oh my God! Jesus fucking Christ! Chris, are you...
Don't touch it.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh no! Oh my God!
And yet, when you tell people that solving 9/11 is the war, people say, what war? What war? We don't feel any war here. I'm going home and watch football now.
And they think they have a comfortable lifestyle, and they're afraid of change. You know, they're afraid to stand up for what's right. And until people are willing to stand up and have the courage to do what they need to do, it's not going to change. And hopefully, what you're doing, what I'm doing, what other people like us are doing, can affect the change that people will stand up and say, hey, I've had enough. The thing is, we have one advantage. That they need us to cooperate. See, if we don't cooperate with them, they can't win.
That's what your book
is about.
Don't Start the Revolution Without Me is about. It's about asking questions.
And I thought in our country that was good. In this country, I thought before 9/11 it was good to ask questions. It was
challenge
good.
Authority.
Challenge authority. But now apparently we've changed to where you're not allowed to challenge authority. You have to accept what the government tells you, keep your mouth shut, and stay in line. Well, that's not the America that I served as the military. I served because, to me, defense of free speech, popular speech, the First Amendment doesn't need to be defended. It's unpopular speech is why we have that amendment. And it seems that when you question 9/11, you're asking unpopular speech today.
The Patriot Act is 7,000 pages, as most of you know, that was passed, that was pulled out of a drawer after 9/11, mysteriously intact. Okay, it was already made, and it mirrors thousands of pages, mirror the Soviet criminal code that established the KGB, the Soviet Gulag system under Joseph Stalin. Okay? Neighbors it allows things that you can't even imagine in the United States of America. Secret charges, secret evidence, secret grand jury testimony. By that I mean we were never, I had two attorneys. The first was a public defender because I couldn't afford a $200,000 defense or $300,000 defense. This was going to be astronomical, so I had to have a public defender. He didn't know what to do. He just had no specialty. He had no capability to do this case. My second attorney was, after prison, was named Brian Shaughnessy, and a superior attorney, one of the best. He's done many CIA cases. He's a former federal prosecutor. He had a top secret security clearance for most of his career. He worked in the court of Judge John Circa. You remember John Circa, who did Watergate? Brian Shaughnessy was the top prosecutor assigned to Judge Sirica's court. Neither one of these attorneys was ever allowed to know what I was accused of doing. They were never allowed to see the evidence that a crime even occurred. They were not allowed to know what the crime consisted of. What activity was it? What did this woman do? Oh, we can't tell you that. Oh, no, we can't tell you that. We do know that, because I know what I was doing in that time period, that I was possibly accused of receiving a book on depleted uranium and cancer rates in Iraqi children. And this book would have exposed, I suppose, the threats to American soldiers from long-term exposure to this hideous depleted uranium, which has caused grotesque defects in Baghdad. And because they had a health security risk, because we can't really tell our soldiers what we're doing to them, this was considered a classified item. But I should go to prison for 5 years because I got a book? Wouldn't you think if there was a if you were on a jury and you heard that there was a classified evidence against someone, wouldn't you presume it was like something really big? Something really, like, really, boy, she must have done something really, really, really bad. No. Because they can exaggerate, they can falsify, they can take, they use the secret evidence to hide the paucity of evidence against you. They make it, it casts this big shadow over this, it's like one tiny little thing that creates this huge shadow across the room.
the way they carry out the plans are very bizarre. It is, I would say, the exact opposite to what a normal human being would like. We want peace, they want war. We want life, they want death. We want compassion, they want hate. We want just to be able to get along. They're totally starving of desires. They will never get enough. And they're hateful, deceitful, treacherous. Most of them extreme cowards, and so on. So they're the opposite to what is looked upon as a beautiful human being. And when you look at the victims, these people are often people that stand up for what we believe is good and beautiful in the world, such as JFK, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, to a certain extent Diana, Gandhi, so many of these that were really making a difference. And I would also say that one of the reasons they were taken out was because they were so loved, they were so popular, that had they decided to go in a different direction towards a beautiful world, just like JFK did after the Cuban Missile Crisis, then boom, that is when they get terminated. Like you mentioned before, I've been receiving different peace prizes and stuff like that because I focus on peace. My intention is harmony, balance, equal rights to everyone, all of this. And I will receive death threats. How weird is that? How bizarre is that?
The Jews of the world, the Zionists, and their co-religionists everywhere are determined that they are going to again use the United States to help them permanently retain Palestine as their foothold for their world government. Now that is just as true as I'm standing here, because not alone have I read it, but many here have read it, and it's known all over the world. Now, what are we going to do? The life you save may be your son. Your boys may be on their way to that war tonight, and you don't know it any more than you knew that in 1916 in London, the Zionists made a deal with the British War Cabinet to send your sons to war in Europe. Did you know it at that time? Not a person in the United States knew it. You weren't permitted to know it. Who knew it? President Wilson knew it. Colonel House knew it. Others knew it. We went in there. We were railroaded into it. If I can be vulgar, we were suckered into that war merely so that the Zionists of the world could obtain Palestine. Now, that is something that the people in the United States have never been told. They never knew why we went into World War I. So the Jews can have Palestine as their commonwealth. They fooled you so much that you don't know whether you're coming or going.
9/11, in my very educated opinion, was not just an evil inside plot, it was a diabolical inside plot, whose purpose was, in my opinion, to terrorize the United States into putting Israel's interest above our own. I call that treason. To get the United States military into the Middle East, as Nicholas Rockefeller told Rousseau a year before 9/11. This was a long-time goal of the Project for New American Century U.S. and Israeli Zionists, to effect Israel's goals using American blood and treasure, which is still happening. CENTCOM, which stands for Central Command, the Central Combatant Command of the United States military of the Pentagon, had already, before 9/11, been moved to the Middle East. You would think that CENTCOM would be centered over the United States. Well, one of the reasons for that is, as you have already learned, there was no combatant command over the mainland United States until immediately after 9/11, when they created NORTHCOM for that very purpose. Reported dual Israeli-U.S. citizen Paul Wolfowitz was Deputy Secretary of Defense, number 2 immediately under Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld. Richard Pearl, reported dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, proclaimed himself the Prince of Darkness, and he chaired Rumsfeld's Defense Policy Board. If Richard Pearl is the Prince of Darkness, Dov Zakheim is the king. Dov Zakheim is a rabbi and reported dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. He wrote a paper advocating a staged catastrophic event to force the United States into war to reconfigure the Middle East in Israel's interest, and presented it to the Project for New American Century before they wrote the Project for New American Century manifesto. And Zakheim is credited with the actual New Pearl Harbor quote in that manifesto. Zakheim headed all of the Pentagon's accounts as its DoD comptroller under Rumsfeld, as the $2.3 trillion was announced being missing the day before 9/11 on September 10th. CIA whistleblower Susan Lindauer says it was really $9.1 trillion and that it had gone for Israel. Pentagon auditors tracking the missing money, killed on 9/11 by inside explosives in the Pentagon, and the records were destroyed. Zakheim was the chief executive officer of Systems Planning Corporation, a defense contractor that specialized in remote control of airplanes, especially drone aircraft, used in U.S. military exercises, and a special system which destroyed them in their terminal phases. This is what the evidence shows actually happened at the Pentagon on 9/11. Systems Planning Corporation had a subsidiary that actually oversaw the 1993 World Trade Center 1 attack, so-called investigation, and through that investigation obtained the secret World Trade Center blueprints, which were needed to know where to plant controlled demolition explosives throughout the building. Dov Zakheim arranged for the Pentagon to receive leased converted Boeing 767 fuel tanker planes, which are consistent with what eyewitnesses saw of the plane that actually struck World Trade Center 2 on 9/11. Reported dual Israeli-U.S. citizen Philip Zelikow headed the 9/11 Commission cover-up as its executive director. Reported dual U.S. Israeli citizen Michael Chertoff headed the Department of Justice alleged, quote, investigation, which is a cover-up of 9/11, and became the second new Department of Homeland Security director. So we must ask, whose homeland and whose security? The insider 9/11 plot was the highest evil because it was premeditated. It was based on a Hitlerian scale big lie. We have seen that not just the whole official story of 9/11 is a lie, but every single individual part of it is a lie. The 9/11 plot was designed to kill masses of our innocent fellow citizens. It was designed to falsely blame and demonize Muslims who could not have done it and did not do it. It was created to justify the invasion of their lands in the Middle East for geopolitical power, oil, and Israel's interest. The aggressive 9/11 wars that have killed hundreds of thousands, displaced millions, and cost our country trillions are based entirely on lies and are the highest crime under international law and the Nuremberg principles, which we wrote as the victors over the Nazis in World War II. So what is the source of this high evil? Incredibly, it is the mentality of Nazism. So who and what are the neocons really? The 9/11 Pentagon neocons, Wolfowitz, Prince of Darkness himself, Richard Pearl, Shalabi, Khalilzad, were all students and are followers of neocon chief philosopher Leo Strauss. They all studied under Professor Strauss at the University of Chicago, and Professor Strauss' ideology is even more extremist than his personal mentor and sponsor in Germany, Hitler's own legal theorist Carl Schmitt. The Schmitt-Strauss doctrine is that the state needs enemies and must create them if necessary, and must fabricate lies for the many, for the people, while its leaders, quote, embrace the darkness, unquote.
We also have to work the dark side, if you will. We're going to spend time in the shadows.
Leo Strauss taught that, quote, those who are fit to rule are those who realize there is no morality and that there is only one so-called natural right, the right of the superior man to rule over the inferior. This is from Leo Strauss and the American Right, a book published about Strauss's so-called philosophy in 1997. Leo Strauss's neocons literally brainstormed the attacks of 9/11 decades before those attacks. Attorney Stanley Hilton studied under Leo Strauss with Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl at the University of Chicago. Hilton's senior thesis under Strauss detailed a plan to establish a presidential dictatorship in the United States using a fabricated Pearl Harbor-like incident as its justification. Stanley Hilton, Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Leo Strauss, and others discussed an array of different plots and incidents like September 11th and flying airplanes into buildings way back in the 1960s. And note that the book that Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, passed out hundreds of copies of shortly before the 9/11 attacks was the 1962 book by top neocon Roberto Wolfstetter. The 9/11 neocon's mentor's mentor, therefore, was Hitler's own justifier of evil, Nazi Carl Schmitt. This is a quote from Professor Francis Boyle, an internationally renowned professor of international law at the University of Illinois. Quote, Schmitt was the most notorious Nazi law professor of his day, justifying every atrocity the Nazis inflicted on everyone. We're talking about the Holocaust. We must understand that these so-called neoconservatives are, in fact, neo-Nazis. They espouse the Nazi doctrine of Schmitt and Strauss and Machiavelli and Nietzsche, the doctrine of the Superman, unquote. This is what internationally acclaimed journalist Seymour Hersh had to say. Quote, we, that is the United States, has been taken over basically by a cult. 8 or 9 neoconservatives, we've seen they're really neo-Nazis in their mentality, have somehow grabbed the U.S. government. Just how and why they did it so efficiently, we'll have to wait for much later historians and for better documentation than we have now. But they managed to overcome the federal bureaucracy and the Congress and the press with the greatest of ease. This does say something about how fragile our democracy is. Unquote. Lawrence Wilkerson, who was Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell in the Bush-Cheney administration, about this same coup said, it's not a coup, it's worse. The truth is, our government was and still is penetrated and controlled by a Zionist Israeli fifth column that took over the White House, the Congress, the military-civilian superstructure, key military officers and intelligence personnel, and the mainstream media leading up to, on, and after 9/11. The level and extent of this penetration is unprecedented in the history of the world and amounts to a literal invasion by an un-American and hostile force. The same year, 2003, that General Wesley Clark gave that warning that the United States government, civilian superstructure of the military, key military officers and special operators and intelligence personnel had been taken over by an Israeli neocon fifth column coup, Israel's own Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, frustrated that his Middle East destabilization and domination plan wasn't going as well and as quickly as planned, declared that the United States had already conquered Iraq. Remember Bush's famous false and absurd premature mission accomplished speech from the deck of a Navy ship that same year, 2003? Ariel Sharon went on that it was time that the U.S. marched against Libya, Syria, and Iran. Note that President Obama has made Sharon's Libya demand already a reality, that the U.S. is now destabilizing Syria by supporting none other than al-Qaeda-affiliated Syrian so-called rebels, and that the war drums are building now for an attack on Iran. I do not believe it is a coincidence that the same lead actor who played in the movie Pearl Harbor, Ben Affleck, that prepared the ground for the American public to accept the, quote, new Pearl Harbor, unquote, meme for the inside job 9/11 attacks, just happens to be the producer, director, and leading actor of the movie Argo, a transparent piece of Hollywood CIA propaganda which is intended to demonize Iran and prepare the American public to now accept a war against that final nation in the neocons' quickly falling row of Middle East dominoes.
I've been studying the Middle East, Israel and Palestine for, many years, almost 40 years now. And I went there the first time when I was 18 years old. And then I started living on this kibbutz and, experiencing the Zionist reality. But when you looked at them, you could see that it was so blatantly propaganda. It was completely propaganda. And I realized then that the depth of the propaganda and the way that the Israelis themselves have been deceived about what Israel's all about. This Israeli-Palestinian conflict is really the central conflict of our time. It's not a conflict that can be easily resolved. It's not something that's going to be resolved by some adjustment of territorial borders, because it's like a zero-sum game. The Israelis want it all. The Palestinians get nothing. It's the party that's in power in Israel today is basically the Likud coalition. And this is the coalition of people this coalition was created and came to power when I was living in Israel in 1976 and 77. And I remember that when they won the election, my Israeli girlfriend, she was very sad. She was crying and saying that she was a labor kibbutznik. She said, this is the day that Israel died, because the terrorists have taken power. The terrorists have come to power. And I didn't really know what she meant by that, because my understanding of Zionist history wasn't so good as it is today. But what happened in 1977 was that Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, the former heads of the Zionist terrorist gang, the Irgun and the Lehi, the Stern gang, these two parties had created a coalition of all their former terrorist buddies. And Netanyahu's in there, the revisionist Zionists. They came to power in Israel. And this is when the plan for 9/11 began. The plan for 9/11 was in the works right away, because this party that came to power, the Likud party, as I said, was the party of the terrorists. And they used terrorism as a strategic tool to achieve their goals. And what they wanted to achieve is that Israel has no hinterland. Israel is a thin sliver on the sea. There's no hinterland for them. So what they needed is that they needed the United States military to come in and to basically fight their wars for them and to give them a buffer zone. And you can see that first happening, for example, in 1982, when the Israelis invaded Lebanon. They went up to the Litani River. They had secured southern Lebanon, and they intended to keep that area. But and the United States and the French and the Italians were called to hold the line. You remember that. And then, of course, we had the bombing of the barracks in the airport in Beirut, and hundreds of Americans were killed, and about 100 Frenchmen were killed, and Ronald Reagan pulled the troops out. But that was the first time that Menachem Begin and his cronies tried to get the United States to provide a buffer zone for Israel. Well, it didn't work out very well, so, of course, the Israelis, because the Israelis cannot hold that territory. They can't hold that much land, so they need the United States to do it. So this was the plan in the 1970s. In 1979, the head of the Mossad, the man who founded the Mossad, his name is Theodor Herzl, he told an American visiting minister, who is a Zionist, that Arab terrorism will come to the United States, he said. And when it does, they will bomb your tallest building in New York City, because that's a fertility symbol. Now this he said in 1979 to Michael Evans from Texas. And you have to ask yourself, well, how did the head of the Mossad know that the Arabs planned to bomb the tallest building in New York City? I mean, where did he get that information from? This is the first inclination that we have that the Mossad was actually designing a plot to attack the World Trade Center and blame it on the Arabs. And this is exactly what happened. In my book, when you read The Deception Changed the World, you'll see that from that first articulation of the plan in 1979 by the former head of the Mossad, Theodor Herzl, through to the preparation of the plan, to the carrying out of the plan, to the covering up of the crime and the foisting of the deception on the American public, at every single point, at every single point where a decision had to be made to advance this lie, there was either an Israeli agent or an American Zionist who was beholden to the State of Israel. as I said, this deception is perpetuated and foisted on the American people primarily through the media. We are informed by the media, and we are deceived by the media. The media has betrayed us. We don't have a free press in this country. And in this deception, the 9/11 deception, the primary target is the American people. They don't care what the Palestinians think. They don't care what the Afghans think. The Afghans have no idea why we're in their country. They don't think it has anything to do with, they don't know anything about 9/11. They don't understand the connection 9/11, American troops in Kabul. That means nothing to them. The Pakistanis, the Israelis, the deception is not aimed at them, it's at us. We are the target of this deception, which is why we are the ones who have to understand the deception and disabuse ourselves and our friends and our neighbors. That's the only way we're going to get out of this. Because if we are still mired in the deception, then we're trapped. Then we're trapped. We will not be able to figure our way out as individuals, as communities, or as a nation.
The mainstream media, which is largely Zionist-owned, all of the major networks, all of the major national newspapers, all 3 of the weekly news magazines, all of the major political journals, most of the major publishing houses. The only thing that happened on 9/11 that was discussed in the media, that have been accepted by the government, that was described in the 9/11 Commission, are 19 named Arabs on 4 planes bringing down 2 buildings. And the rest of it, in Orwellian terms, has become a non-event and a non-story.
And if you want to know what's happening in the world, go outside of the U.S. media, because it's owned by 4 corporations. One of them is this one. And you know what? Go outside of the country to find out what's going on in our own country, because it's frightening. It's frightening. And if you don't
think we're being brainwashed as a whole country, I think not.
I think democracy is threatened in a way it hasn't been in 200 years, and if America doesn't stand up, we're in big trouble.
You don't stand up right news, but even you worded a war on terror. I think personally that is propaganda.
Exactly, Russiagate. Thank you.
I don't like the wording of it like that.
Right, because it makes people into evil and good.
I'm sorry, but the people who
America, when anyone from the Mideast has been so demonized that no matter what, it's impossible for some people to believe that the Iranians in any way could ever do anything ethical in any capacity. That they've somehow been dehumanized to the point where they're not people who, they're just the enemy. They're historically, have governments ever faked incidents or incited incidents in order to get them into wars? Nations.
Has
that happened historically?
I'm sure it has.
Yeah,
I don't think this is the case right now.
You call it whatever you want. I want to tell you, they lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
Let me ask you one more thing. Do you think the government purposely misled the American people to believe that Iraq had something to do with 9/11?
No.
They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
Want to know why we'd go into Iran? For the money.
Listen.
That's why we would do it. And that's corrupt.
To be totally just, you believe that Dick Cheney, George Bush, and the whole administration should be prosecuted for their acts.
Governor Jesse Ventura
is with us.
But if that is the case, then we should prosecute. We should have prosecuted Harry Truman. Should have prosecuted Abraham Lincoln. Should have prosecuted Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Are you for that?
They're dead.
But if you talk about justice,
they're dead.
So if they weren't, would you prosecute
reality. You're giving me a hypothetical that's bullshit.
I'm giving you a hypothetical because you're making up Rosie O'Donnell like scandals that says that 9/11 was an inside job.
Well, why are you not allowed to ask anything about it?
Have you read the 9/11 report and you think it's a piece of fiction?
No, I believe everything in it. I believe my government's never lied to me, have they? Let's see, where should we start? The Gulf of Tonkin incident? Now that took us into war in Vietnam. They've now admitted it was a lie. So 58,000 of my generation were killed based upon a lie. But that doesn't count, does it?
What does that have to do with 9/11?
That shows that we will lie to go to war.
They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
All right.
It's disgraceful that the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake out. I think it's a disgrace. And I say that, and that's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do. And as far as CNN going out of their way to build it up, and by the way, we just found out I was coming down. Michael Cohen, Michael Cohen is a very talented lawyer, he's a good lawyer in my firm. It was just reported that it wasn't this Michael Cohen they were talking about. So all night long, it's Michael Cohen. I said, I want to see your passport. He brings his passport to my office. I say, hey, wait a minute, he didn't leave the country. He wasn't out of the country. They had Michael Cohen of the Trump Organization was in Prague. It turned out to be a different Michael Cohen. It's a disgrace what took place. It's a disgrace. And I think they ought to apologize to start with Michael Cohen. Many of us remember the long gas lines and the constant claims that the world was running out of oil and natural gas. Americans were told that our nation could only solve this energy crisis by imposing draconian restrictions on energy production. But we now know that was all a big, beautiful myth. It was fake. Don't we love that term, fake? What we've learned about fake over the last little while. Fake news.
If I may, I have to ask about this. Since you started the whole wrestling video thing, what are your thoughts about what has happened since then? I mean, CNN went after you and has threatened to expose the identity of a person they said was responsible for it. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think what CNN did was unfortunate for them. As you know now, they have some pretty serious problems. They have been fake news for a long time. What CNN and others, NBC is equally as bad. What we want to see in the United States is honest, beautiful, free, but honest press. We want to see fair press. I think it's a very important thing. We don't want fake news.
Your questions and conclusions only lead to that one statement. Did you think everyone's against America? The government's against America?
True. Always remember, dissension's the greatest form of patriotism. Tom Jefferson said that.
Tom, you were alive then?
No. You're going to insult me
I got to go to radio, yeah. All right, Jesse, take care.
He's leaving.
You can see how disappointed I am in President Obama. When he was elected, I thought, oh my God, thanks, we're done with George Bush. And it's worse. We're now in 3 wars. Gitmo still hasn't closed. Well, you know what it tells me? He ain't in charge. No. That's what it says to me. You know, maybe he got in office and they sat him down and showed him the Zapruder film. And said, you know, you better look at this. You know, this is what we do to presidents that want to do things that multinational corporations don't want done.
There was a crazy analysis of all the witnesses of the Kennedy assassination and how many of them died untimely deaths. They did a statistical analysis of the odds of all these people getting murdered. And just in random
killings. It's like 1 billion to 1.
Yeah.
Well, how about Dorothy Kilgallen, the great Washington reporter? And she got an interview with Jack Ruby, and she came out of the interview, and all she'd quote was, "I'm going to break the Kennedy case wide open."
Yeah, I remember that.
And then she was found dead within a week.
This is the all the different people that died untimely deaths. It's all heart attack, unknown, minor accident, dead. 1 car crash, dead. Heart attack. This is what's interesting. They all died within a very short amount of time. Gunshot wound to the head.
Well, you know what Judith was involved in, and Oswald? They were at New Orleans attempting to create a fast-moving cancer that Lee was supposed to deliver to Mexico City to try to kill Castro.
A fast-moving cancer?
Mm-hmm. And what killed Ruby? A fast-moving cancer.
Yeah, I guess.
And you know who's in charge of it all? That guy that's on all the New York or the New Orleans Saints football. Who's the famous doctor? The Ochsner Clinic? That's who Judy worked for, the cancer expert.
They can give you cancer?
They were attempting to create a fast-moving cancer.
And you think they give that to Jack Ruby?
Yeah, because they were attempting to kill Castro with it.
We've lost our civil liberties in the U.S. with the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, in which any of us can be arrested, held indefinitely without charge, without a trial, without a right to a lawyer, and we can be even tortured and assassinated. This is not what our forefathers fought for. So I'm not sure about yours here in Denmark, but I'm sure the risks are equally grave if we don't take a sharp, cold, hard look at the facts.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
It's very hard in America when anyone from the Mideast has been so demonized that no matter what, it's impossible for some people to believe that the Iranians in any way could ever do anything ethical in any capacity. That they've somehow been dehumanized to the point where they're not people who, they're just the enemy. They're terrorists.
Zionists made a deal with the British War Cabinet to send your sons to war in Europe. Did you know it at that time? Not a person in the United States knew it. You weren't permitted to know it. Who knew it? President Wilson knew it. Colonel House knew it. Others knew it.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that our lives begin to end the moment we remain silent about the things that really matter. He also said there comes a time when silence is betrayal. I heard those words too. So while I hope that my actions, combined with the actions of millions of others who also want justice and peace, will change the world, what can I do to resist war and injustice today? Today is the beginning of people who hunger and thirst for the truth to come together. I know that there is a worldwide community that is ready to know what happened on September 11th. As I have said too many times, we all know what we saw, but how did it happen?
The president, presuming to himself the authority to kidnap, basically, an American citizen anywhere in the world, including in the United States, hold them without trial, without an attorney, indefinitely, torture them, and even kill them. All constitutionally, this is, of course, absurd. And it needs to go to the Supreme Court.
Like, I was thinking the other day that you can figure out how bad a person you are by how soon after September 11th you masturbated, like how long you waited.
And yet when you tell people that solving 9/11 is the war, people say, what war? What war? We don't feel any war here.
Seems like the groundwork is being prepared in one way or another. And this particular iteration of the propaganda is interesting because it ties everything together. It's ISIL, it's terrorism, it's nuclear, and it's people getting these materials via the internet's dark web. Oh, be afraid of the internet and free communication online. If only they could be, using some sort of encryption software, then you could hit all the buttons and demonize everything all at once. So, yeah, I mean, it looks like they're trying to tell us what the next false flag is going to be. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, but I think we have to be aware this is now a meme they're pushing pretty hard right now.
I have so much trouble envisioning that there could be an effort to reduce the world's population from around 6 billion to much closer to 2 or even less. But there are indications that that may be, even if it's unintended, the effect of many of the operations that are taking place in the world today.
God. Oh my God.
And it's very, very, very hot. Please, I'm gonna die, aren't I? No. I'm gonna die. Ma'am, say your prayers. And we're gonna think positive because you gotta help each other get off the floor. Now, stay calm. You're doing a good job, ma'am. You're doing a good job. It's so hot. I'm burning up. Okay, if you don't, the floors is hot and everything is hot. No, they're just help. Stay calm, ma'am. Help. Hello, ma'am.
The Zionists and their co-religionists rule this United States as though they were the absolute monarchs of this country. The Zionists and their co-religionists have complete control of our government.
Determining national positions, especially when it comes to Israel, the fountainhead of today's global strife, is indeed a genetic issue, for it is one and one only genetically bound together ethnic group that is dictating the limits of public discourse on the Middle East issue. As president of the Brother Nathaniel Foundation, we want to do everything we can through the media, through the internet, through publications to get out the truth, even if we are labeled anti-Semites. This is a battle that requires much courage and much conviction. I myself, I am willing to fight this battle. The question is, dear viewers, are you?
And then 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, there was, on the very first day, there was indications that Israel was involved, that Israel had prior knowledge. The first indication was, of course, the 5 dancing Israelis. These 5 Israeli agents who were seen clapping, videotaping, high-fiving, and clicking lighters with the burning towers behind them. They were on Jersey side of Hudson River. And these men were, on September 11th, when we were in Pennsylvania already driving home, I heard Ted Koppel came on the radio and said that the FBI is looking for 5 Middle Eastern men who were seen observing and videotaping and celebrating the attacks on the World Trade Center. And I thought, well, they might be Israelis, Middle Eastern, could be Israelis. And it turned out the next day they were Israelis. They were captured by the FBI. First by the New Jersey police caught them. Then they were turned over to the FBI. But these 5 men turned out to be Israeli intelligence operatives. 2 of them were known to law enforcement as being Israeli Mossad agents, the Kurtzberg brothers. The other 3 were operatives. They all pretended to be moving agents. They all were like working for this dodgy Mossad front known as Urban Moving Systems in Weehawken, New Jersey.
It's very clear that these neocons were very much Zionists. Many of them had joint U.S.-Israeli citizenship. I actually spoke during a freedom rally on the grass in front of the Capitol building on the 15th of April, 2008, and called for the resignation from government of any person who had been appointed with joint citizenship, because how can you possibly know that their loyalty to the other country doesn't outweigh their loyalty to the United States?
I don't much care about other people or other countries. I don't hate anyone in particular. I don't like anyone in particular. I'm an American. My loyalty is strictly to the United States. And I don't care what my ethnicity is or what my ancestry is. My allegiance is that. And my concern is only whether something helps or hurts the United States.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
When I traveled to Europe and England, I encouraged citizen investigations of 911. And I learned that to question 911 was to be labeled an anti-Semite. Even more bizarre, those who questioned the tragedy were equated with Holocaust deniers. And I wondered why. By demanding an independent investigation of what happened on September 11th, I became a political pariah.
"9/11, the World Trade Center destroyed. And of course, the story that was told was that it was in fact Muslims. I held a press conference on September the 16th, 2001, and I warned President George W. Bush to be careful of how he responded to such an act of the destruction of nearly 3,000 lives. But remember, at Pearl Harbor, we lost nearly 3,000 again. And the Navy was almost completely destroyed to get America into war. What I'm trying to say to us is our lives mean little when those in high places see a bigger game through will.